According to the bold and the beautiful spoilers, Thomas Forrester and Hope Logan may be getting back together. Will some broken engagements push these ex-partners back together? Now that Matthew Atkinson's comeback as Thomas Forrester has been confirmed, it's time to consider what comes next for the character. Because love stories are frequently featured on the CBS serial, we'd want to focus on Thomas's romantic future. Thomas was going to marry Paris Buckingham when B&B viewers last saw him, but there's no certainty they'll be married. Paris and Thomas have never felt like a forever pair, therefore they may split up before they can exchange wedding vows. If that happens, Thomas may conduct some introspection and discover Hope is still the woman he desires deep down. Thomas's fixation with Hope may even rear its ugly head, depending on the tales B&B is cooking up. Regardless, Hope may find herself in the same failed engagement boat if her relationship with Carter Walton fails. Now that Daphne Rose is back in Los Angeles, she has the potential to entice Carter away from Hope. Carter might betray his present fiancée, causing Hope to cancel the wedding, or he could pump the brakes if he ultimately chooses Daphne over Hope. In either case, Hope and Thomas would have something in common if they both lost their future spouses. Thomas expected to spend the rest of his life with Paris, but he may eventually discover they were never going to last. Hope may learn the same thing about Carter and begin to wonder if she should have accepted Thomas's proposal from the beginning. Do you think Thomas and Hope might have a romantic reunion? Will Hope and Thomas continue their romance once their engagements end? According to the bold and the beautiful spoilers, Thomas will return to the show in early September, so we'll keep you updated as more information about his next fascinating plot becomes available. Hope stood outside the cafe, her breath evident in the early evening coolness. The fall air had a crisp edge. The sign above the door read Brood Awakening, a lovely spot in their tiny town where she and Thomas would spend languid Sunday mornings. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her purse's strap. It had been 2 years since their last conversation, 2 years since the night she walked away from him, leaving behind a ring, a promise, and a future she wasn't sure she could face. Now she was expecting to see him again. Not because she wanted to, but because fate or perhaps bad luck had a way of bringing them back together. Inside, Thomas was already seated at their old table near the window, his dark hair slightly longer than she recalled and his jaw set in that familiar manner that indicated he was nervous but tried not to show it. He looked up as the bell above the door chimed, and their gazes collided. For a brief moment it appeared like time had stood still. The same electric pull, the same unconscious understanding that had previously held them together. But time had passed, bringing with it the weight of unfulfilled promises, unspoken truths, and lives that had gone in divergent paths. Hope sat into the seat across from him wearing a faint, wary smile. "Hey," she said, her tone softer than she had intended. "Hey," Thomas responded, his tone equally reserved. He motioned to the coffee cup in front of her. "I ordered the usual. Black 2 sugars. I hope that is still correct." She nodded and wrapped her hands around the steaming mug. "It is. Thanks." The gesture's familiarity ached, reminding him of how well he knew her, or more accurately, how well he used to. She wondered if he still drank his coffee with cream, or if that had changed. They sat quietly for a minute, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. The clink of cups, the low murmur of discussion, the hiss of the espresso machine. It all seemed so typical, so banal, but it felt like the air was charged with everything they weren't saying. "So," Thomas concluded, leaning back in his chair, "you wanted to talk." Hope drew a big breath. She had practiced this moment 100 times, but now that it was here, the words felt awkward in her mouth. "Yeah, I've heard about you and Lila." She stopped to gauge his reaction. "I'm sorry it didn't work out." Thomas's expression stiffened as his fingers lightly tapped the table. "Yes, well, engagements don't always last, do they?" His voice had a sharp edge, not quite harsh but close enough to make Hope flinch. She stared down at her coffee, the dark liquid reflecting the gloomy lighting above. "I deserved that," she said gently. "I didn't mean it like that," Thomas responded hastily, his tone softening. "It's been a weird year, you know? Lila and I were fine for a time, but something wasn't right. Not like." He paused, his jaw clenched as he stared out the window. "Not like us." The words hung silently between them, heavy and obvious. Hope felt her chest tighten, memories pouring back. Late-night trips, shared dreams, the way Thomas's laugh could make her forget everything. But such memories were intertwined with others. Disagreements, misgivings, and the time she slipped the engagement ring off her finger and left it on his kitchen counter. "I heard about you and James too," Thomas remarked, bringing her back to the present. "He appeared like a kind man. What happened?" Hope shrugged, attempting to keep her voice steady. "He was a good person. Is a good man. But I do not know. It simply wasn't enough. Perhaps it was too much. I am not sure anymore." She laughed softly, a self-deprecating sound. "I'm kind of a mess when it comes to this stuff, aren't I?" Thomas's lips twitched, nearly smiling. "You're not the only one." They slipped into another silence, but this one felt different, less strained. More like the quiet they used to share when they were content just being together. Hope took a sip of coffee, allowing the warmth to ground her. She hadn't planned to contact Thomas after everything, but when she learned about his broken engagement, something inside her stirred. A mix of curiosity, guilt, and something she wasn't ready to name. "Why are we here, Hope?" Thomas inquired, his voice low yet direct. "You did not simply call me to catch up. Not after 2 years." She met his eyes, her heart racing. "I don't know," she said. "When I heard about you and Lila, I kept thinking of us. About what occurred. And I guess I wanted to know if you were all right." Thomas arched an eyebrow, wary but not hostile. "You wanted to check on me? That's it." "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not it." He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, his gaze fixed on hers. "Then what is it? Because I have spent the last 2 years trying to figure out what went wrong with us, and I still have no idea." Hope's throat clenched. She'd spent the same 2 years trying to forget him, convincing herself that walking away was the correct decision. But now, sitting across from him, she wasn't so certain. "I was scared," she said finally. "When we were together, it was huge. Very intense. I felt like I was losing myself in it, and I had no idea how to handle it." Thomas's demeanor softened, but there was still a hint of hurt in his eyes. "You could have spoken to me, Hope. You didn't need to run." "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. "I understand that now. Back then I couldn't see a way forward without feeling like I was giving up everything." He looked aside, his jaw clenching as he pondered her words. "And now?" he inquired after a bit. "What's changed?" She didn't really know how to respond to that. She'd spent so long running away from the intensity of their love, trying to rediscover herself in other relationships and locations. But nothing has ever felt exactly right. Not with James. Not with anyone. And now, with Thomas sitting across from her, she felt the same pull and anguish that had always been there, even when she tried to ignore it. "I don't know," she replied honestly, "but I am tired of running. And I'm weary of pretending I'm not missing you." The words lingered in the air, raw and unrestrained. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, he resembled the child she had fallen in love with all those years before, open, vulnerable, and hopeful. But suddenly his attitude changed, guarded, and he sat back in his chair. "You can't just say something like that and expect me to know what to do with it," he added, his voice rough. "Hope, I spent a long time trying to get over you. And now you're here saying you miss me, and I'm not sure if I can go through it again." "I'm not asking you to," she replied hurriedly, her heart sinking at his words. "I just needed to say it. I needed you to know." He gazed at her for a long time, his expression opaque. "Do you remember the night we drove to the lake?" he inquired abruptly. "It was freezing, and you insisted on getting out to look at the stars, even though we didn't have coats." Hope grinned despite herself, her memories clear and warm. "Yeah, you kept whining about how cold it was, yet you stayed out there with me regardless." "Because I'd have done anything for you," Thomas said, his voice low and passionate. "That's something you never got, Hope. I was all in. I still am despite everything." Her breath caught, and she felt tears well up at the corners of her eyes. "Thomas, but I can't do this halfway," he said, his voice firm. "If you're here because you're lonely, things didn't work out with James, or you're nostalgic, that isn't enough. I need to know you're serious about this." Hope swallowed hard, her thoughts whirling. She hadn't come here planning to reveal everything, But now that they were here, she couldn't keep back. "I don't know if I'm ready to promise forever," she murmured, her voice shaking. "But I know I've never had feelings for anyone like I do for you. And I am eager to try if you are." Thomas did not react immediately, and the stillness between them was thick with possibilities. Finally, he stretched across the table and touched her hand. It wasn't a guarantee just yet, but it was a beginning. A small tentative bridge between the past and whatever came after. "Let's take it slow," he replied, his voice quiet yet forceful. "No rings, no major plans. Just us. We're figuring it out." Hope nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Okay," she whispered. "Just us." They stayed there for a little longer, the cafe's warmth spreading about them like a cocoon. Outside, fall leaves whirled in the wind, a reminder that the seasons, like people, may change. For the first time in a long time, Hope sensed a glimmer of hope, not just for a reunion, but for something new and genuine. As she gazed at Thomas, his hand still resting near hers, she wondered whether they could find their way back together. The subsequent weeks were a delicate dance of rediscovery. Hope and Thomas met again, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes for walks in the park where they had previously etched their initials into a tree. They spoke about everything and nothing, their professions, their families, and the minor details that had defined their lives since their separation. But they also talked about the more difficult things, the sorrow they'd caused one another, the worries that had drove them apart, and the hopes they'd each hung on to despite everything. It was not easy. There were times when old wounds resurfaced, and one of them would withdraw, fearful of being harmed again. But there were also light-hearted moments. Thomas taunting Hope about her horrible music taste, and Hope giggling as she reminded him of the time he tried to prepare dinner and nearly set the kitchen on fire. They were slowly rebuilding something not the same as before but perhaps stronger as a result. One evening, as they walked along the river, the setting sun shed a golden glow on the water. Thomas came to a halt and turned to her. "I've been thinking," he remarked quietly but calmly, "about what you said in the cafe. About being tired of running." Hope felt her heart skip a beat. "Yeah, I'm tired of it too," he murmured, looking into her eyes. "I don't want to continue pretending I'm over you because I'm not. But I need to know you won't disappear again." She grabbed for his hand and intertwined her fingers with his. "I'm here," she said firmly, despite the tears in her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." He drew her closer, and for the first time in years, Hope felt like she was precisely where she was supposed to be. The road ahead would not be easy. Broken engagements and shattered trust left lasting scars. But as they stood there with the river flowing peacefully by them, Hope realized they had a chance. Not only to rejoin, but to create something new that could bear the weight of their past and the unknowns of the future.